What do you do when the kids are grown up and they've gone to school? Well, you open a fish store and you become the most successful fish store in one of the largest centers in Canada. And that's what our guest, Ellie Knight, has done. And Ellie owns and operates the Ogama Fish Store. And I have long wanted to ask you what Ogama means.
Ogama is a Cree Indian word and it means the chief. And it's actually named after a boat my family had when I was a child, an old wooden fish boat that was built in 1890 up at the lakehead.
Yeah.
And it's something that was associated with my childhood and fish, so we called the store Ogama.
Well, I want you to take a break, sit back and relax, because you're going to learn all about fish in the most delightful way I can think of. Sit down, relax, and join Ellie and me after this break. Ellie, what are the questions you get the most when people come into the store?
Well, the most important thing is how do I cook it and what do I do with it? And you proceed to tell them. And most people don't know a fresh fish when they see one.
What do you mean?
Well, they come in and there's all kinds of fish in the counter and they say, what's fresh? First of all, you should be able to recognize the fresh fish yourself.
How?
Well, one thing is by the eyes. They have to be clear and bright and they have to not be sunken into the head. Another thing is a fish to touch. A fresh fish, it makes no indentation. If the fish isn't that fresh, it leaves an indentation in the fish where you put your finger mark on it. Another thing is by the gills. The gills should be red, not gray.
Listen, I've gone into fish stores. Nobody lets me get that close to the fish.
Learning.
Good morning. Does Dave Barrett, the former Premier of British Columbia, really want to be Premier again? Is it true that some secret social credit polls indicated that had Bennett called the election, he might well have lost? This and other things with Dave Barrett this morning. But first, Mr. Barrett, I want to throw a little curve at you. Premier Bennett was here last week and he took a shot at you. And I want to give you equal time to respond. And this is what he actually said at that time. You go for that? If not, why not?
Well, I have. For 3 years, I've had him in the legislature, and I'll tell you, Jack, it's just not worth it. I've heard the same speech, the same negative criticism, the same sort of things he peddled in the 1960s, 1972. He's had his opportunity in the legislature and talked to anyone. The gallery's empty when Barrett speaks these days because it's the same tired, worn-out speech. He hasn't done anything constructive or made any constructive suggestions since I've been in there. Now, look, Dave has had 20 good years, and perhaps he's beyond his time.
Said to him was a face-to-face debate, and he said, no way. Respond.
Well, it's obvious that I'm giving him the opportunity to wipe me out forever. If he's that good and that he knows that what I have to say is of no value, then the way to finally finish me off politically is to come on television with me. I'm willing to take that risk. I mean, it's obvious that the fellow believes that he can. His arguments or his approach are far better than what we have to offer as the New Democratic Party. I'm not running for cover. Quite frankly, I think he's running for cover. He's frightened. He doesn't stay in the House very much. He's not very good on his feet. He needs to be primed. He's very programmed. There's no spark or initiative or drive or imagination. And frankly, Jack Webster, he's frightened to meet me face-to-face on television.
More with Dave Barrett. Dave Barrett is, of course, the leader of the New Democratic Party and leader of Her Majesty's loyal opposition in the House of Victoria. And he's a man you know well, most of you. He came up very fast, and some people think that he's lost that pristine sparkle and vigor and would really like to have his job taken away from him in the proper democratic manner by Stu Leggett.
Well, I don't know. Are you giving a commercial or making an analysis? The fact is, Jack Webster, that I feel very good about what I'm doing, as I've always felt good about what I'm doing with the old CCF and the New Democratic Party. Social credit government is making us look good every single day. I'm convinced that the Premier was going to call an election, Bill Bennett was going to call an election. He got cold feet. They're afraid to face the people. This is the first time in 6 years we don't even have a fall session, let alone talk about the debates in the legislature. We don't even have a fall session. MLAs are getting paid for year-round work. The House hasn't been called. We have no idea of what the government is up to. They're afraid to face the legislature and afraid to face the people of this province.
You might have added it. It's the first time, too, in social credit's total history that they've gone more than, or appeared to be going more than a 3-year session.
That's quite true, too. But this is not really the old social credit, Jack. You know that. And
what is it? What is it?
The term that I heard coined was by the mayor of Fort Nelson, Andrew Shook. He called them the
Good NDPer.
Good NDPer, yeah. Called them the sock libs. The sock
libs.
Sock libs. The 6 major cabinet portfolios are held by ex-liberals who have now found a home since the Liberal Party is going down the tube, and the right-wing establishment that they have always represented in the lower mainland of British Columbia is wiped out. They found a home under the label of social credit. There is no more connection with this government than social credit than flying to the moon.
All right, get back to my so-called commercial. You really, first of all, you're telling me that Bennett is turning out really to be a liberal lover, right?
Well, there's no
that
question.
Trudeau is his hero on the Constitution.
Yeah, I don't see much difference between he and Trudeau. I really don't. For instance, why isn't he down there in Ottawa fighting for jobs in this country, fighting for investment in this country, instead of playing around with the Constitution? We finally got to the point where they're admitting that patriation of the BNA Act may not be all that important. This whole discussion of the Constitution should be focused towards economic development, jobs in this country, and social security in this country.
This is a First Minister's Conference which has an agenda on the Constitution. He's prepared his proposition, which isn't that much different from anybody else's. How can he be fighting about the economy right at this moment?
Look, Jack, in previous First Minister's Conference, I made exactly the same point that I'm making now. And you'll recall when René Lévesque got elected, this whole country was stirred up about the language issue, about the Constitution. I was on television with you at that time, and I said, and we both discussed that, I said, look, this is a passing phenomena in terms of concern by the average Canadian. They don't give a darn about the Constitution, they don't give a darn about the language issue, they want a job first, and they want some security first. Now this constitutional conference should be discussing alternatives like leaving the BNA Act where it is, leaving the Constitution alone and getting on with planning the development of the resources of this country.
Well, resources is really the big Western fight, and that's Blakeney. Blakeney was really bitter yesterday when he said that the federal guns had been turned on him to take away his control over the potash and the oil revenues.
I know exactly how he feels, Jack. We had the same thing when we established the BC Petroleum Corporation, which social credit and Bill Bennett fought and screamed and hollered against and has turned back to the people of this province over $500 million. We had the same fight. Now, we went a different route. We set up a Crown Corporation for the resource revenue. Blakeney went into the taxation route. So far, we escaped Ottawa's greedy hands on those funds, although there was a threat by Turner.
On the mining royalties.
Yes, on the mining royalties and also on the Petroleum Corporation. And I said that threat, that if you were going to impose special sanctions on BC's Crown corporations, then you'd had better be prepared to do it to Quebec's Crown corporations. That was the last I heard of any nonsense like that.
All right, on resources, what would you be saying on the control of resources if you were in Ottawa this morning?
Well, I would be saying that, first of all, he's kept our Petroleum Corporation. You know, it's a little bit nonsensical.
It's a tax gathering, a very effective tax gathering agency.
They let that money slip into the hands of the American oil companies. When we brought in the legislation, they cried and moaned for those oil companies. Of course, you have to have guts to move in those areas. We did it. Now, Bennett's boasting about the money that he's making off our publicly owned corporation. The approach that I am suggesting is that Crown corporations should be separate and distinct and protected under the BNA, and any moves on the Constitution to interfere with those provincial rights should be stopped cold. On the other hand, there are federal things that should be protected, and these are the specific areas they should be talking about.
But you're saying that they're wasting their time now tiddling about on the language of the monarchy, for instance?
Look, Jack, I am a monarchist. I am committed to the BNA. Leave the BNA alone. Let's get on with solving problems in this country. 16 by-elections were held. And not one of those by-elections was the Constitution an issue. Now, what do you do to get a message to that government?
Jobs and index pensions and hatred of the government were the issues, weren't they?
Well, hatred of the government comes out of frustration by people who just want to go about building their own lives with a maximum amount of opportunity to have options in their lives. Now, they view the Liberals and some of the governments of this country as a detriment to them getting on with their own lives.
What would you tax anew? What new government agencies would you set up if you win the election next year?
The one tax that will come back is the succession duty. We will grant the exemptions to a higher level, up to $1 million on the exemptions, on the succession duty, up to $1 million.
What was it before?
It was $250,000.
$1 million of private estate.
$1 million estate without taxation. Anything above that begins the succession duty
What was the
tax.
figure you claimed that the big boys ripped us off on succession duties when Bennett cancelled it?
$48 million that first year. We've lost a total of over $100 million since the Socreds have been in power, with the big boys not having to pay that money on their estates.
But there were always stories that the big boys moved their estates to Alberta.
Look,
I mean, how can you have a succession duty in BC when the big money you're after just moves offshore?
that is not the case, Jack. One of the last estates we taxed was a fellow left $27 million. And for his widow and 4 children, as much as we heard hollering from Social Credit about it, we left her $20 million out of the $27 million.
Oh, shame.
Yeah, it's tough to get by on.
Anyway, you would exempt the succession duties up to $1 million per family estate.
That's right. Now, the question of moving out, a lot of people forget it was old man Bennett, W.A.C. Bennett, who brought in the succession.
Yeah, he
duty.
refused to cancel it too
That's
under
right.
pressure.
But then he did promise in '72, when he saw he was losing the election and he wanted to cater to the very wealthy, he did promise to remove it. But he made a speech in the House when he originally brought it in and said that if anybody left British Columbia after having made their money just to escape succession duty, he said, good riddance. And I agreed with him. I agreed with him.
Now, Levesque, just on the Constitution, I don't want to get bogged down in it.
Okay.
But you're a great friend and, quote, admirer of Levesque as a social democrat, which you regard him, right?
Well, I regard him as a social democrat, but I do not regard the PQ as a social
but
democratic
Levesque
party.
himself.
Levesque himself, I have admiration for him.
And you're now telling me that Levesque is over the hill, that
Yes.
he's no longer a
Yep.
threat.
Yes, Levesque is finished. The establishment will rally behind Claude Ryan. There have been no dramatic changes in the essential economic and social structure of Quebec under the PQ. They've never got it together because philosophically they were all over the ballpark. They will be whooped by Ryan tragically. Not that Ryan is a bad person. He's
Why
a very
is it
good
tragic
person.
that a man who wants to smash Canada is going to be whooped, as you say?
Look, the social and economic drives of reestablishing Quebec as a force within Confederation will keep this country together. As long as there's a sensible dialogue around those issues, there's a better chance of keeping together.
In other words, if Levesque became a true Federalist, you would say, for God's sake, keep him there.
That's right. Absolutely right.
Barrett and Webster. Mr. Barrett, this is not the time for jokes. I'm deadly serious. You've already given a pledge that you will bring back the Succession Act,
That's right.
Succession Duties Act, with a limit of $1 million. You would also, to my surprise, if you were properly quoted, scrap the Essential Services Act.
That is correct.
Now,
that's
who brought
correct.
in the Essential Services Act? You were the tough guy. They brought in the legislation.
Yeah, they brought
You
it.
always made it clear that in a labor dispute where lives were threatened, you would act.
That's right, Jack. And I would.
Isn't that what the Essential Services Act is?
No. Look, either you understand that you trust people and believe that within a democratic framework they will hopefully make the best decisions. If you enshrine in legislation the denial of the right of citizens through a group action to withhold their labor, then you deny that there's any hope of rational growth of human beings making sensible decisions. Now look,
That's a social worker speaking.
no, you and I have always had this philosophical debate. What I've said is that people have the right to strike.
Regardless.
Regardless.
Any old
Governments,
strike.
No, legal strikes.
Legal strike.
Yeah, governments have the right to govern, responsibility to govern. There are times, for the sake of the total community, the government of the day must directly take the responsibility to intervene in a dispute that they feel is endangering life or limb or the economy. Now, those are the conditions. And I acted on that. I wasn't chicken like Bennett was with the ferry strike. Let's be blunt about it. He was chicken. He sat back for a whole week while that disaster was going on.
Agreed.
It was a failure of human relations. Once it's reached that point, take the blame and get on with the job.
In other words, you would remove the legislation which is on the table now, which prevents certain, quote, essential workers from striking
That's
at
correct.
all.
That's correct.
Mind you, the Labour Board, Weiler, brought in a very cute gimmick to prevent disruption during the hospital strike, in which he ordered certain people to cross their own picket
That's
lines
true.
and offered limited services.
Jack, what we saw with Weiler and with Bill King, our Minister of Labor's Labor Code, was a growing up in developing labor attitudes. After all, labor relations are human relations. And really, when you get down to the point of a strike, in 90% of the cases, you're dealing with a failure in human communication. And you get into the area of personalities where a stubborn industrial spokesperson and a stubborn labor spokesperson has met head-on with no room to save face.
Barrett says we would remove the Essential Services Act. Those who can strike legally can strike.
Yeah.
We will call the legislature and stop by legislative action any disruptive essential services.
Any time we feel in a circumstance that we have allowed to develop to that point, after all, government is generally involved in this essential services, then it is our responsibility to face up to that by calling the supreme representative group of a democracy together, the legislature.
Cue for a hyperbole. Runka just quit the Land Reform Commission.
Disaster.
When you come back, what will you, if you come back? I almost must have shown.
Okay.
If and when you come back,
Yeah.
what will you do to the Land Reform, to the Land Commission?
The one
Put
area...
Runka and all your
Well,
NDP people back on
Runka
it.
is not an NDPer, Jack. Let's get it straight. He's not an NDPer.
know, but
and
he-
we had Tories on there. We had Liberals on there. Now, just because somebody goes on a board when the NDP's in power...
Didn't you have a good number of NDPers on
We
that?
had NDPers, we had Tories, we had Liberals on there. And I'm telling you that just because somebody's an NDPer doesn't make them worse than a
Evil.
Liberal or anything else.
Agreed, but
okay.
what
Now,
would you do to the Land Commission if and when you get back?
Bring it back to its original strength, the original purpose. 85% of the population now agrees that we must protect farmland. Now, the farmland reserve came as a shock to a lot of people. But the method we worked out over those painful 2 years was good, was very good. What I think is the last loophole in this is we set up an appeal system directly to the cabinet. The next step is to remove that appeal system from the cabinet and put it to a tribunal, either the courts or some other rotating personnel tribunal, to take it right out of the area of politics completely.
To take away this possible odor of political drag.
Exactly, Jack. You put
Why
it-
didn't you do that yourself?
Because we were under the pressure of immediate anomalies. And the easiest way...
What's an immediate anomaly?
The immediate
You mean
anomaly...
you didn't write the legislation properly?
No, we wrote it well, but we were... Some of the land we froze was already in the process of either being pulled out.
That's right.
Okay, and you were on your program. We went through it in a series of programs.
In spades.
Yeah, okay. So what we said is, all right, the way to handle these anomalous situations, the ones that are halfway through the machinery, is a direct appeal system to the cabinet. Once we clear those over, then close that political loophole and put it right into a commission.
A tribunal or the courts.
That's right.
Good. Next one. What was it? Oh, yes. I chatted up Bennett on what we call the monstrous octopus out of control, the BC Hydro. And he was sorely embarrassed by the stuff that emanated that were going to have fantastic increases, 15 to 30%. You really did nothing to control hydro either, did you?
Let's deal
How does
slowly.
one prevent us from having our throats cut by this monstrous bureaucratic octopus?
Look, Jack, let's deal with that problem. First of all, Bennett fooled himself and the people of this province by thinking that if he removed hydro from direct responsibility to the legislature by setting up the Crown Corporation, that he'd get a hold on it. I debated strongly against this bill, pointing out that the Public Accounts Committee, with an opposition member, as we had set it up, an opposition member as chairman, was the best watchdog way. When you have a government-dominated committee and a government MLA as chairman of that committee, I don't care if it's NDP or Social Credit or Fly-by-Night or whatever else, the politics of the majority dominates that committee.
Are you telling me the Public Accounts Committee has a so-called chairman again?
No, they have an NDP chairman, but they have sidestepped the committee. They've emasculated it and put the Crown Corporations into the Crown Corporations
Reporting
Committee.
Act.
Well, there you are. And what happens is that they're back to WAC's old system of tight control.
Oh, and they've got that Elwood Veach as the chairman of
Veach
that
is the
committee.
chairman. Now, when you go in, the chairman is protecting the government. You want to bring something up? He says, no, that's not on the agenda.
Oh, anyway, the first thing you would do would be fire Bonner.
Well, of course. Bonner's got to go.
And Williston would go too.
Of course.
And all of the Premier's
Look,
staff.
the thing that I think has to be done with hydro, as we were beginning to learn through the Public Accounts Committee, the thing that I believe should be done is some regional input by local communities. By
Mr.
Look,
Barrett.
I'll tell you something. We live here in the Lower Mainland, and we have our generalized beefs against hydro. You come up with me to the Kootenays and see how intense those people feel about hydro, okay? Now, there's got to be some method of having local people express how they feel, what they want done.
Agreed on local problems.
Yes,
but
on
the overall direction of this massive $4 billion debt corporation, even if it eventually will pay its debt one day, surely must be under the direction directly of the Minister of Finance and the Premier.
No doubt about that. You cannot remove it from the government of the day. No doubt about that. I don't dispute that.
But how do you keep them in order when they slip out news 15%, 30% in
Public
natural
Accounts Committee is the only way, the only way, the only way. It worked with us. Now, remember, when we came into power, we took on hydro with a $1 billion deficit from the Columbia River Treaty. Now, I'm going to tell you some things I've never talked about publicly before. When we first got elected, there was an attempted run on our parity bonds.
Remember that?
Yeah. Okay. Now, we never knew who did that.
Who did it?
We're not sure, but it was certainly an Eastern and American financial group. Canadians, primarily Canadians. We were faced with $255 million debt that WAC Bennett had left through those parity bonds, cash debt. We immediately moved to drop that debt to $150 million. We wiped out through surplus funds our first year in office. A lot of people forget that. Okay, we reduced...
Those were the good years, 72,
All right,
73.
they were good right through to the end, Jack. Right through to the end. In our 3.5 years, we spent close to $10 billion, and we took in $20 million short of that. That's all. 1.5 months liquor profits. That's all.
Barrett and Webster. Mr. Barrett, the past doesn't matter. The old Columbia River bit, the mess and all the rest of it.
You were asking about hydro and how to get a hold of it. I'm just telling you the moves we made to get a hold of it. We dropped those parity bonds. We had to borrow money for the first time because of the Columbia River mess.
Was that why you borrowed the Arab money?
Yes, and that's turned out to be a very good deal
That
now.
was the first time you've said you borrowed that money for that reason.
Yes.
And you paid 9 7/8, I think it was.
That's right, and
From-
Canadian funds.
From Saudi Arabia.
I'm not saying the country.
Kuwait.
That's not saying the country.
In
If the
Canadian
present
funds.
government- Yes, in Canadian funds. And if you transfer those loans today with all the squawking by the financial experts at that time, there's $45 million saved just on the face value of that $300 million.
You mean compared to the higher rates
Of
now in
course,
vogue?
of course. No, not the higher rates. The drop in the dollar. We
Oh,
borrowed in Canadian funds. first time we borrowed in Canadian funds. I insisted on that at the time.
You're getting so enthusiastic that if you're elected again, you may again take over the finance portfolio.
No, I'm not. We had excellent advice. Dave Stupich was always there on the Treasury Board Committee, a chartered accountant of very good reputation.
All right. You didn't answer my commercial at the beginning. Remember your snide remark about my commercial? About Leggett?
Stu Leggett?
I asked Stu Leggett if his appearance in the party was a one-act ploy or a two-act ploy.
Stu Leggett is a terrific guy. There are 5 people who could do just as good a job of leadership or better than I'm doing.
Bill King,
I'm not going to name
Stu
names.
Leggett?
Stu Leggett is one of them. Bill
Dave
King
Barrett?
is another. There are a lot of others.
Gary Locke,
There are plenty. Let's put it this way. We're not short of leadership potential.
short of party enthusiasm though.
No, party enthusiasm, unfortunately, is a lot better now than when we were in government. I think that people are far more reflective about comparing the two administrations. That's what's had an impact.
I must admit, Bennett was quite impressive when he offered to deliver your negative pamphlets to all his doors.
Look,
that was
Jack.
a quick-witted thought, wasn't it?
Would you believe another promise of his? He's broken every one. Why would we trust him with the pamphlets, for crying out? Look, isn't it interesting for a government that says, oh, it's the same old stuff, this isn't, that he's spending all his time talking about our pamphlets? Why doesn't he get on with the job
Don't you
of
feel,
government?
though, that there is, generally speaking, apart from the economic situation, a political apathy even within British Columbia for the first time in a long while?
No.
That's why he's smart enough not to have a full session.
I think he's afraid to have a small session.
A full session?
Yes, and I think his own polling shows him there is no apathy.
Well, what have you heard about polls?
We have heard that they were in serious trouble and they backed off calling an election. He went on that tour sprinkling out money. He was traveling with the belly flop champion promoter, Tom Butler, that is paid for by taxpayers' dollars.
Just a minute. You're saying Tom Butler,
Tom
the
Butler,
belly flop promoter?
belly flop promoter, traveled with Bennett, as reported on BC TV, and he was paid for. Arnett admitted that he was going to be paid for by the taxpayers.
Oh, you mean on the PGE, the
That's
BCR
right.
trip?
BCR trip, that's right.
And you object to belly flop promoters being on the...
Belly flop, belly up. What difference does it make with this government, Jack? That I find it incredible. I find it incredible that they pull off stunts like this and there's not screaming and hollering as there used to be with anything we try.
Oh, yeah, you made a trip to Olympia, Washington, and you were all in one car, as I recall.
Sure, and we saved
you
a
got
lot of
hammered.
money. Yeah, we got hammered because we went in a car instead of flying down first class, for crying out loud. This is really, anyway, that's history too.
Okay, now you've got a few new policies out of you as I see them, but you were very tough on Bennett the other day and failing to attract jobs.
That's right.
Be specific, because the mining industry, copper prices are still down.
Okay.
Lumber is doing very well
Very
indeed.
well, very well.
They've
Now,
never made more money in their lives.
The last...
He's going to go ahead with the same fantastic BCR subsidies on uneconomic lines that you would have done.
Couldn't avoid it. Who could avoid it? After WAC planted that mess, we had to continue, and he's now facing the reality. He's got it. The only salvation for BC Rail is to carry that railroad right through to Alaska.
We can't do that.
Will you stop being so negative? There are tremendous possibilities of doing that. It means cooperation with the government of Alaska and the government of the United States. There is interest. Just 1 year ago, as leader of the opposition, I was back in Alaska again. I met with former Governor Hickel. I met with Senator Gravel. Both are interested. Both understand and agree with the concept that I'm talking about. St. Lawrence Seaway, publicly owned railway right through to Alaska.
But surely that will come, and I'm not being negative about it. I'm being practical, Mr. Barrett. That will only come when the national security interests of the United States say it must be done.
They say it now. The last time I was in Washington, that was a major argument. I understand that, and I accept it. The holdback has been first with the federal government, and now with this provincial government. The Americans want that railroad. Commercially, they avoid the Jones Act.
That's right.
Defense-wise, it's a route in and a route out. We can make a deal on that railroad.
And they're no longer afraid of a socialist government in the Northwest.
Well, we have to cooperate with the Americans. Look at the gathering of the Socialist International. They cooperate with those governments all over the world.
Now, what about the PWA jobs that have been lost? I'm surprised you didn't jump Bennett on that.
We have jumped Bennett on it. Don Lockstead raised particular you-know-what over the fact that Bennett hasn't said a darn word over those 200 jobs that are being lost from this province.
After the promise that none would be lost.
After a promise, after the first murmur when he said that
You tried to buy PWA.
we would have bought PWA. Lougheed bought it. He phoned me the day before he bought it. We were both looking at it. I said, good on to you. I expect the continued cooperation between Alberta and British Columbia on transportation, and if there's anything we can do to help, we'll do it. As a matter of fact, I made the offer, if you want to ease yourself politically, Mr. Lougheed, because of being a right-winger, we'll go halfers with you on it. He said no, he just wanted to let me know he was going to buy it. He took static from his own colleagues.
He's the guy who's wiping out the jobs now
Yes,
in BC.
because Bennett has not been tough with him. Now, at first, when PWA made the move, we still had some say, and there was a flush of the election, and we slowed him down. Bennett is now run off to Ottawa and allowing the PWA to get away with this. Now, you have to fight, Jack, and fighting means that you have to look at reciprocal actions. I don't want to get into a job war, but there should be some fighting.
You ready for the phones?
Sure I am.
Webster and Barrett on the telephones. Okay, now don't go away. Go ahead from Port Alberni to Mr. Barrett from Port Alberni.
Yes, Mr. Barrett,
Yes, ma'am.
you call yourselves the party of the people. How come that it was your party that told City Council in Port Alberni you declare a $10 million people's investment in floodplain, or you will get no money for a study what should be done?
Do you understand the call?
No, I don't understand.
Linda, take that off there and see if you can make sense of it. We'll bring it back again if we have to. Go ahead from Vernon.
Hi, I'd just like to say that, talking to Dave Barrett there, we're up there in Vernon, and we figure that as long as Dave Barrett was in Parliament, we had a pretty good thing in the Okanagan Valley, but ever since he went out of Parliament, we haven't got too much going for us up here as far as the jobs or anything else, and I think Dave did a real good job.
One of the greatest dangers to the economic security of that region was the threat by the former Liberal, now Socrat Minister of Agriculture, to the Income Assurance Act with the farmers. Now, he has backed off, but the fear still rests with the lending institutions, to the farmers in that area, whether or not the government is going to continue that program.
Who's the former Liberal Agriculture Minister?
Hewitt, he was a former Liberal.
Yeah, you set up a very generous income assurance for the ranchers up there too, didn't you?
No, it was not very generous. It's an insurance program. In the lean years, they get a formula worked out payback. In the good years, like a good year this year for crops, they pay a lot of money into the program.
Are you not absolutely surprised and a little bit fearful because of the small amount of backtracking Bennett has done with much of your legislation? He hasn't really touched that much of it, has he?
No, there are some things he hasn't touched, and the backtracking from his original position when he said he was running. I mean, that's a compliment to us in terms of the amount of things they've kept. The danger, Jack Webster, is this. If he wins the next election, then those hawks around him and some of his own hawkish ideas will have full vent. They will gung-ho on the destructive course that they followed, like with Panko Poultry and other areas. They will cut loose. I'm convinced that Alan Williams, in spite of his protests, will be run right over. They were catcalling and booing him at the Socrat convention.
Is that fair? Didn't Williams get up and defeat the right to work thing?
How long
Hasn't
will he
Bennett
last?
said?
How long will he last? Jack, when was the last time you came over? Did you come over this spring and see how that backbench is working and how people like Phillips and others are gathering, and Grace McCarthy, gathering more and more power under themselves, and the fighting that's going on in that group?
What you're trying to get me to believe is that if they win the next election, right to work will come down the road.
I'll bet you on it.
But Bennett's a populist.
He
knows what's good for him.
Look, he is not that sophisticated a populist. He is a fellow who has been captured by the bureaucrats. If he was so sure of himself and so solid, then why doesn't he come on television with me during the election campaign?
He would give you an edge. I mean,
Give me an edge. I offered that.
You can out-talk Bennett any day of the week. God knows you can out-talk me any day of the week.
Jack Webster, he's so good and so cool. I read all those PR things. Why, my goodness gracious me, I made that offer when I was premier, and he ran when he was leader of the opposition.
Did you really?
Yes, I did, on this channel.
Go
On
ahead,
this
please.
channel.
Oh, just a moment, please. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes.
Yes, wanted to speak with Mr. Barrett. Webster, something I think that's quite important. I'd appreciate it if you'd listen. Mr. Barrett, I got in the mail this morning the latest 1977 drug user and conviction statistics.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the Heroin Treatment Act.
Right.
I just wanted to inform you that once again, the number of people convicted for heroin in the province of BC has decreased.
Correct. Use of heroin by hardcore addicts in the United States has decreased 18%.
And why is that, Mr. Barrett?
Simply because they're turning to other drugs.
And is it not also a fact that police enforcement is in many ways turning blind eyes because they were so jammed up and they don't bother anymore?
Well, Jack, now you're preaching what I have find very attractive in the approach
For
to...
legalization of heroin?
No. A little bit of benign neglect. They are damn fools. People who use heroin are damn fools. There is no known treatment program. Some of them die off in their 40s. That is their choice in a free society. This $16 million boondoggle for heroin treatment that you don't know what the treatment is, I don't know what the treatment is.
Yes, I do know what the treatment is.
They're going to give them guitars.
What are you talking about?
Yes, I may well agree that it finishes up to be a boondoggle, largely because the act has been watered down so much that you can't even deal with those who are just in the entrance to heroin,
Jack.
and because they won't run a drug-free institution.
All right. You cannot run a drug-free institution.
I could.
Jack Webster,
The
I
civil
respect
libertarians
you.
wouldn't like it.
You could not, because even in Devil's Island with suppositories, they hung on to drugs and their money. Jack, I've worked 5 years in prisons. I know what the prison game is all about. It's an abnormal social structure that beats the system. A guard only works 8 hours a day. A prisoner works at it 24 hours a day. They can do anything they want in institutions.
We blew a little story the other day about how they're throwing drugs into a cala over the stupid little fence and tennis
You're not
balls
even
now.
you're not even a Davis
keep
Cup
Motor
star. You
Brandon
couldn't. You can't keep drugs out.
No, but I object to this kind of call when we have a pressing social problem and it's
Talking
far too much.
seriously, Webster.
This guy is quite serious. The decline, for whatever reason, is existing.
Close our eyes and it'll go away.
No, it won't.
You know, no. But the thing to do is yell at it, and then it'll go away. Is that your answer? Now let's be calm about it. I admit, as
Let the guy finish talking.
okay.
It's the most senseless piece of legislation, recently. Don't listen to these clue narcs. They have a vested interest in perpetuating
I
the
agree
problem.
entirely,
We need
Clue.
these busts. Don't listen to a word they say.
Clue has a vested interest in jobs and pensions and activities and wiretaps
They've
and
done
everything.
a good job.
The police.
They've done a good
people
job.
involved with the
It's-
Alcohol and Drug Commission.
You'll be telling me next there's been no problem in Vancouver at all, and we've been dreaming what happened in the past 30 years.
Heroin is a very serious problem. But if we look at it this way, and I know it's difficult for some people to accept this analogy, let's say it's a broken leg. You don't cure a broken leg by yelling at it.
There's so many drugs around this town that you're up to your ankles in coke and Hornby Street.
All right, Jack, let's accept the fact that that's true. I don't mess with drugs, you don't. Anybody who does is stupid. But there is no law against being stupid. But we don't have to be stupid in response to it. We should spend the $16 million in preventative work, in proper education.
I sometimes wonder,
All
Mr.
right.
Barrett, whether all the preventive work and all the rehabilitation in the prisons does a damn bit of good.
I didn't say rehabilitation, did I?
Same thing.
No, it is not. That's where you make a mistake.
Yes.
Preventative work is not rehabilitation. Rehabilitation costs you 100 times. You
We
can't-
wasted billions on so-called rehabilitation.
Do I disagree? I was the guy that brought in the legislation that's now being copied in Ontario. When you go to jail, you go out and work and pay for your room and board. Why should we pay for people's room and board while they're in jail?
Well, I
But
agree.
I'm talking about preventative work in terms of broken homes, disturbed children. Anytime you get a child at 5 and 6 and start doing the preventative work then, it's worth millions later on.
Thanks for your call. I'm sorry I was
mention it.
rough. I'm much obliged. How much time have I got before the break? 45 seconds. Well, I'll just take the break right now and cool off and back the calls with former Premier, leader of the NDP, Dave Barrett. Mara.
Where are you calling from, sir?
You ready?
I'm ready.
Go ahead to Mr. Barrett.
Yeah, Mr. Barrett,
Yes, ma'am.
if you're re-elected, what are your plans for this welfare system, which you more or less made it so bad in BC when you were in, that we had everybody coming from different provinces saying, oh, go to BC, they got the easiest welfare system going. Now, I think personally, and I've been in BC over 20 years, that anybody shouldn't be allowed to go from province to province with the idea of saying, I'm coming to that province to get a job, and if I can't get a job, I'll go on welfare. You're making the younger generation not like the older generation who used to work for their money and pay their taxes. Now you're making you made the younger generation so easy.
Okay.
Okay, ma'am, we've
Okay.
got the point. Mr. Barrett, defend yourself if you can.
Why should I defend myself? Let's talk facts. The fact is that under the Canada Assistance Plan, the federal government shares 50% of all welfare costs. People are free to move in this country. They were free to move in here when W.A.C. Bennett was Premier. They're free to move in here when Bill Vander Zalm is Minister of Welfare. Exactly what she's complaining about has been going on in this country for 12 years. Now let's get that straight.
I'm not talking about Canada. I'm talking about the people that came up from the States.
No, you are
You
wrong,
did.
lady. Absolutely wrong.
I
The
know
same
for a fact
conditions,
I lived in
Just a minute, love, just a minute.
madam, the same rules on immigrants getting welfare are the same rules under W.A.C. Bennett, under us, and under the present social
Why
credit.
don't you diffuse the lady by saying there was a time in British Columbia when the average person certainly felt they were getting ripped off
That's
by
right.
every piece of ragtag and bobtail that could lie its way across the border.
No question about it. Before we got elected, during the time we got elected,
I
and
blame
still
Trudeau
going.
for that, not
Look,
you.
A Canada Assistance Plan. Let's get it straight, lady. Okay.
That's right, agreed. That's the fact,
Okay.
ma'am.
Okay.
Sir, go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Barrett. I've read in the paper where the present government are building ferries. Is this right now, or?
They have announced that they're going to build 2 ferries. When, we don't know.
Oh, well, I do think that's a good thing.
Oh.
On the other hand, I wonder why they sold off the ones we had.
Well, look, if they're going to finance these new ferries the same way they finance the ones they've sold off, then what's the point of government building them at all? If it's such a good deal, let the private corporations build the ferries and lease them back. Here is the proof of the pudding.
Good point.
The argument has always been given by social credit that they got a good financial rate. If that's the case, then let the private sector put up the capital. We have always
I
argued.
should have asked him that last
You
week.
should have, Jack. We have always argued that they could not prove that that massive amount of capital was borrowed at a good rate. It is not. We are responsible for maintenance. We are responsible for crewing. They got away with a non-complicated capital loan.
In other words, yes, it was a lease back.
That's right.
The Montreal outfit bought the ferries and leased them back and gets X dollars over the years.
That is correct.
Mind you, Bennett would have come back at me, we can't even dump the Queen of Surrey.
What are
We're
we,
now into it for 25 million.
Jack? What are we building new ferries for if we got the Queen of Surrey? The Queen of
gotta
Surrey.
dump it. It was a disaster.
No, it was not. It will be used on the coast and the Seattle Run. You wait and see. It cannot be replaced for that money. That's point number 1. Point number 2, it makes a false mockery of their whole lease system. If it was so good,
True.
why doesn't private capital build
I
it?
should have asked the Premier that. I will the next time. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, Jack.
Morning.
Yeah, I'd like to have a little talk with Mr. Barrett there.
Yes, sir.
Yes, what is your opinion of Mr. Bennett's little boy here selling out the Skagit Valley?
Well, that is it. Look, at this point, the Socreds are trying just as hard as we did to get out of that disastrous deal signed under W.A.C. Bennett. At this point, I have my doubts about the ability of the Socreds, but they're trying. I knock social credit, but in this instance, they're still trying to save that valley. Now, I hope they do it. I hope they don't blunder.
Do you think it can be saved?
Yes.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Barrett.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to know that when the next election comes and you form the next government, if you were going to change the policies that they have now for property tax and also ICBC.
Well, let's deal with the property tax. First of all, we moved on a scale through the McMath Commission to remove school taxes over a 5-year period from property. We were 2 years into that, and that was killed. The McMath Commission was killed a second year into their third-year study. Unfortunately, a serious amount of local taxation has been dumped on the small businessman and the homeowner to the relief of the large corporations as the province. The last leg of that work of the McMath Commission on the taxation and assessment of the large corporate structure in this province was abandoned, and the natural increases in taxes that have to come with inflation have been shifted on, in some instances, to small businesses, and in some instances to the homeowner.
Yeah, and Vancouver has hit the small business very hard indeed.
Very bad.
Both of your governments are in the same bind. It's a question of what are you going to do with your general revenue?
Yeah, no
How
question.
are you going to apply it?
The first thing we did, now, Jack, a lot of people forget this, and I think it's important we look back at it a bit. When we set up the Petroleum Corporation and we forced the price of natural gas to the Americans up to $1, I got into a fight with the federal government who wanted to keep that price at $1. I then announced that from now on, 1/3 of everything over $1 would be shared with the municipalities. Once we announced that program, the federal government capitulated because every local mayor got off his you-know-what and supported what we were doing.
Does that still happen?
Yes, it still happens. It was Bennett who was handing out those petroleum grants on the last trip. That was kind of ironic.
Your checks.
Yeah, our checks. But look, the price of gas has to go up. If we're going to sell the resource, get that price up and increase, that's one area of relief for that homeowner.
You mean the price of gas to the Americans?
Yes, it's got to go up.
We've got to milk them for as much as we can.
Why? Not a question of milk, fair price. I just want the same price that Texas gets or Indonesia
That
gets.
was $2.
Texas, we're at about $1.94. Free gas is selling about $2.35, $2.40 now. Indonesia.
You can't put that up without approval from Ottawa.
That's right. But when you've got a federal government that has a former Minister of Energy, Jack Webster, a former Minister of Energy sitting in that cabinet, he quits the cabinet and within a year sits on Shell Oil Board of Canada Board of Directors.
McDonald.
Yes. You begin to wonder about conflict of interest and commitment to the people of this country.
Well, once you're at that level in the establishment, you're bound to have a built-in conflict of interest.
Well.
But look at the index pension.
If I said that, you'd say, there you are, you're just a nasty socialist.
No, that happens.
Okay.
But I was going to make a nasty crack at you.
Okay.
Look at the index pension McDonald's got. Look at the index pension you've got here for the civil servants in BC.
Why shouldn't you have an index pension?
What about the working man? Don't worry about me, Davy Barrett.
What about Social Security in the United States? It's been indexed by Roosevelt. It became the major pool of capital investment. And I want to tell you, Jack, that our major competitors have index pension funds as a source of investment for capital competition. Sweden.
Quite a specific question, Mr. Barrett.
Yes.
The federal government has seen the light on the bitterness and the unfairness of unlimited indexing to one group of privileged people.
Yep.
And they have said that the only funds available for indexing will be the funds contributed by the pensioner.
Look,
would you do that in
I'm
BC?
not opposed to that object. The best way to do that, Jack, is to cap the top end and make it universal. The same way we did with Mincome. Stop and think about it. We capped the top end and we loaded the bottom end. We said that people who are already wealthy don't need any supplements. Those who do will get the index income.
The COLA, if you can call it that, the indexing for an old age pensioner is zilch. The indexing for the retired deputy minister is this.
Look, I'm not opposed to indexing if it's capped. That was the thing that we demonstrated with Mincome.
Will you cap it for provincial servants?
We will cap it for politicians and for civil servants on a negotiated basis.
Much have you had done on your dental plan lately?
Nothing. They've killed our dental plan.
Have they killed it?
Yeah, I think so.
That's good.
Remember, no. Look,
why should you have a dental plan? Just because
you mean the MLAs?
MLAs.
Oh, no, we still got that, Jack. You know that when those private enterprises get into power, they look after the politicians. We have socialized dental care. The first socialized Medicare I got under was
as an MLA.
As an MLA. Look, that's the hypocrisy of these right-wing governments. They take care of themselves very well. Bennett's office is
And when
double.
you get in, you keep it.
Jack, I've never fibbed about the kind of costs that go into having a government. But remember when they used to attack my office? They said I was spending money on Twig, you remember that?
Oh, Twig.
Bennett's doubled the cost of running the Premier's office in only 3 years. You know who's yakking about that? Not me. Vic Stevens. He's finally cottoned on. These fellows, the Socreds, are spending a lot more money than the NDP. They've increased the budget by 33%.
Don't you feel sorry for Gordon Gibson?
No, I do not. I'm sorry. I feel sorry that the people of British Columbia. I think we're losing
That's
a
what I
first
really
class.
meant to say.
For him personally, well, he's a very fine person. I feel sorry.
He's
for
gone now.
Yeah,
Finished.
The people of this.
Stevens might win a few seats.
He's
good,
a good man.
noisy little Tory.
Good man. Look, he's bringing, like Gibson did, a good, solid, philosophical debate back to this province, and that's good stuff. Good stuff.
You're going to meet a friend of mine today when you're at lunchtime, Herman Kahn.
I don't know if I'm
of the
going to meet
Hudson Think Tank Institute. He'll be there.
Well, I've been invited to give the keynote or the luncheon address, and I've got a few things to say.
My thanks to Dave, what's his name again? Barrett.
Webster.
Leader of the NDP. We'll see you soon, Mr. Barrett.
See you,
I'm quite
Mr.
sure
Webster.
about that.
Okay.